Hello everybody, this is Cap Coldblood and welcome back to the channel. Today I have decided to begin something that I have actually wanted to do for a long time. Now, for those of you that know me by an alternate name, you know me by the name of Rook. And when you knew me by the name of Rook, you know that the thing that I did the most that everybody loved was something called Rook's Reading Room. And that's exactly what I'm going to be bringing back here. I will take a written work and I will read it out to you. Now, of course, copyrighted works are covered under copyright. I cannot read them out loud without some sort of license or direct consent from the author if it's written after 1929. But fan fictions that have not been filed for copyright are completely and totally subject to me reading them for your enjoyment. Now, you can find this relatively easily, the specific story I'm talking about. I'll give you all the details. You'll need to find it if you'd like to read it through yourself. So, today we will be discussing the Subnautica fanfiction In Charge. Now, as you understand, most fanfictions are only a chapter or two long. They never really go anywhere. They're hastily written or terribly written. I know I've taken my hand several times trying to write works, and over the years, only now am I starting to get a huge handle on it. But here is one that I have found. It's pretty much a novel. It's incredible. It's got over 20 chapters, and it's got deep characters with good progression, and I love the story to death. Now, if you have not played Subnautica, the basic story is you are on a spaceship going across a planet, planet 4546b. You are shot down on this planet, and it is an ocean world. There is not a spit of dry land in sight. There is some dry land, but most of the world is completely underwater. So, you must gather materials, survive, and learn how to get off this planet. Well, this story takes the main objective of Subnautica and twists it into a novelization. Now, for those of you that have played the game, you will notice little discrepancies throughout the story. This was written while the game was still in development and finished when it was fully released for the PC. So, some of the things may be out of whack. For example, the description of the Reaper Leviathan in one of the chapters is the old Reaper Leviathan with the green eyes. So, a couple of discrepancies, but I ask you to overlook those because the writer of this story, Coincidencless, a wonderful name, is an amazing storyteller. He weaves a wonderful tale around this that really makes me wish that it was the story of the game. So, let's begin Chapter 1 of In Charge, Derailed Life. Varian, the main character. He groaned and stirred awake. With a heave of effort, he turned over in his wide bed and into the spot of warmth next to him. The spot of warmth started talking. "Morning, dear," she said, giving a kiss to the top of his head. "It's too early to be morning," he grunted. He turned away from Sylvia and sat up, rubbing the sleep from his eyes. After a few moments, they adjusted to the darkness of his and his fiancée's cabin. All things considered, it was a decently sized one for two people on the Aurora, a benefit of her being high up in Alterra's ranks. 2 beds, a shower, coffee. He hadn't even had to pay much. Sylvia Berkeley was part of the engineering crew and had brought him along the premises so that he could lend his programming assistance. "What time even is it?" he muttered. Sylvia seemed to explode out from beneath the covers, walking over to their desk and waving a hand over it. The red hologram flared to life, and Varian closed his eyes with a groan. "Oh, 6:50, come on! We don't even have to be in the engineering bay until noon." Her hand grasped his and started tugging. "Up," she commanded simply. "I'm on the crew, remember? I've got a loaded schedule today. Besides, we're passing by 4546b soon anyway, and I want to get a good view of it before I vanish into the bowels of work. I hear it's an ocean world." "Fine," he drawled, a lazy grin tugging at his lips. He got his feet under him and stood on his own. His clothes stuck to his sweaty skin after the night. He looked down at Sylvia and waggled his eyebrows. "How about we shower first, then breakfast?" Sylvia hummed and shuffled up to him, pressing her chest into his and wrapping her arms around his back. "Oh, I think that sounds like a great idea," she purred. A few minutes later, they stepped out of the shower. Sylvia went to go get dressed while Varian stayed in the bathroom. His hair was wild and messy, points sticking in all directions like craggy spires. "Open drawer," he said aloud. There was a little blip, and sure enough, the drawer next to him opened. Varian grabbed his hair gel and got to work putting his turquoise-streaked mohawk back together. After a bit of fiddling around, he viewed himself in the mirror and grinned. "Nice," he whispered, and exited the bathroom. Sylvia was finished getting dressed, having thrown on a light blue blouse and golden pants, with her hair up in a bun. She was off in the corner by a large gray box. Inside the box was a compartment with 2 cups next to each other, with a dark stream of liquid pouring into each. As Varian watched, the streams cut off. "Coffee completed," the machine chirped. "Would you like cream?" Before Sylvia could open her mouth, he said, "Yes, in one of them." "Dispensing product," it happily said, as Sylvia mouthed, "Wimp," at him. She took her coffee, as black as her hair, and downed it in one gulp while smiling smugly at him. While the coffee machine took care of his cup, Varian got dressed too. He didn't pay too much mind to what he wore, just threw on a brown Aurora lining vessel shirt and gray sweatpants. He didn't bother with socks, just shoes. "Come on, hurry up," Sylvia said, rushing around to find her PDA. "I want to get breakfast before we pass by 4546B. "Why are we even swinging by it?" he wondered, grabbing his sweetened coffee in one hand. "Our destination is nowhere near it." Sylvia shrugged. "I actually asked around about that. Don't tell anyone, but apparently some Mongolian ship went down there a few years back. They want to take the excuse to scan the world and see if they can find the wreckage." Varian scoffed. They probably crashed there because they were too busy praying to the persistence of life or consciousness or something. "Ow!" he shouted, gripping his arm in exaggerated pain. "Be nice," she chided. "Come on, we're going to miss breakfast," she said, pulling her PDA, little more than a rectangular piece of plastic and electronics, off the ground and giving it a swipe. As she did, the doors to their room opened and light spilled in from the corridor beyond. Varian quickly found his own PDA, stashed it, and followed after Sylvia into the Aurora's hallways. Already the ship's crew was up and about, scurrying through the Titanic hallways he had to crane his neck back to fully appreciate. Some of the crew chattered animatedly with each other while pointing to things on their PDAs. Others operated propulsion cannons, strange mechanical devices the size of an arm, with 3 blue prongs at the end. From the end came white streams of energy, which wrapped around titanically large metal boxes and held them aloft with ease. There was a focused air about them. They'd be in charge of scanning the water world they were flying past, after all. Once they had breakfast, Sylvia would be joining them. He and Sylvia took a few turns through the Aurora, the ship's engines gently humming beneath their feet, as they told each other little jokes they'd found over the internet. They didn't pass through the prawn bay, as they were closer to the opposite end of the ship. Eventually, they found themselves in the cafeteria. After ordering from the breakfast machines, cereal and milk for Sylvia, toast and a slice of orange along with some water for him, they found a table and sat there. There weren't many others with them. A few passengers, a handful of crew members, and what he thought was a small envoy of Mongolians, keeping to themselves off in the corner. There weren't any windows on the Aurora. Something about structural integrity, according to Sylvia, but there were external cameras that could stream to their PDAs, so he and Sylvia sat together and, as they ate, propped her PDA on a stand. She flicked her fingers across the glass surface and pulled up a video feed from outside the Aurora. The screen flickered, but then displayed a bold picture of planet 4546b, the closest planet to HIP 4546. HIP 4546 was a yellow star, 11 times the size of the sun, that gave up 38 times the light. 4546b was a comfortable 7-ish AU away from the enormous star, and they were coming up on it fast. They should be by closest approach in an hour or two. Varian had to admit, it was a nice-looking world. He'd never seen an ocean world before. There was something eerily beautiful about a solid blue marble, cloaked in streaks of cloud and capped on either end with ice, floating through the void. It even had 2 moons, one closer than the other, in the backdrop. "Sure is something," he said through a mouthful of food. "Wonder if they're still alive down there." "Man, I almost kind of hope that they aren't," Sylvia said. "Can you imagine living alone like that, surrounded by aliens and maybe any other survivors for years on end? Nobody else to talk to but who you have. Nowhere to go if you need space. No internet, no entertainment, no relaxation. Just constant stress, day in and day out." She shivered. Varian put an arm around her and gave her a peck on the cheek, grinning madly. "Well, I imagine if it was us, then somehow I'd survive having only you around," he teased. "Aww." She kissed him back. They finished up their breakfast, watching the orb of 4546b rotate on its axis. Eventually they finished and got up. Anyway, Varian said, I have to go help the crew with the logs. They still haven't found that memory leak. Right, you go do that, she said, pushing him off the bench as he stood. I've got to head off too. You've been riding my ass. See you around. Love you, honey, he said, leaning in. See you later. They kissed again, and when they pulled away, both of them smiled. I love you too, Sylvia said, before heading toward the tunnel that led to the Sea Moth Bay. Meanwhile, he headed toward the upper levels. There were more and more crew members this high up, and the hum of the Aurora's dark matter drive was quiet. He passed a row of emergency escape pods and headed down an elevator to the server room. It was a deceptively long walk. The Aurora was massive. Along the way, some of the other programmers greeted him. Hey. Hey there, Varian. Hey, say hi to Miss Berkeley for me. He returned a few greetings, then found a seat in a nearby terminal. A light bar sat in front of him, just a glowing line in the desk. He waved a hand over it, and the hologram materialized over it. With that done, Varian got to work. He and the others had been tackling a memory leak recently. The Aurora systems were failing to properly delete some data, but the data was still rendered inaccessible, so the junk just kept building up and up, taking up their memory. The quantum computers had a lot of storage, but they were also producing the junk at a relativistic pace. Finding the problem was just such a headache, even with all the crew around also working on it. Is it there? He asked himself, scanning the code on screen. There was nothing wrong. Everything was working as it should be, but maybe it was causing a problem with the lines under ship exhaust handler. Computer, bring up... Boom. Varian flew out of his seat, as did everyone else, and landed on the ground with an oof. For a moment, all the light died, stranding him in utter blackness. A heartbeat later, the auxiliary lights kicked in, rows of searing white forming along the bottoms of the walls. What the hell? Somebody shouted. Varian tried to stand, but only to find himself standing alongside the gray walls as gravity changed around him. Warning, the ship's autopilot blared, drowning out all thought with her volume. Multiple severe hull breaches detected. Emergency evacuation is in progress. All personnel report to the emergency escape pods. Evacuation? Breaches? Escape pods? He scrambled to his feet and made for the door. He stumbled, leaning forward with his arms flailing as he tried to catch his balance, and in his haste, he accidentally shoved someone. He left the room, trying to remember where the escape pods were, and ran. Varian's mind shut off. His brain stopped forming thoughts that could be interpreted as sentences. The only thing that went through his mind was a vague sense of, out the door, to the left, one stair flight down, escape pods, underlined by desperate panic that clenched his throat and made the pounding of his blood deafening. His feet moved on their own, and then gravity flipped to the right, and he landed with a grunt. He was the first out the server room door. He didn't look behind him. To the left, one stair flight down, escape pods. His feet skidded along the ceiling as he headed to the left. Or was it to the right? It didn't cross his mind to question it. He just knew which way the escape pods were. Behind him, there was a blast of searing heat that briefly cast the metal in front of him in warm red. One stair flight down, escape pods. He careened down the stairs, which were now right side up as gravity spun back to normal. Varian ran into the escape pod tunnel. He caught a brief glimpse of some others getting into various pods, and he distantly heard the whoosh as they ejected. He found a door with a crimson number 5 over it and grabbed the door to open it. Then, gravity cut out entirely. "Ah!" he shouted, his feet floating beneath him as he struggled to open the door. Another explosion rocked the Aurora. "Attention, power failure imminent," the autopilot intoned like a death knell. "All personnel." With a heave of effort, Varian opened the door to escape pod 5, only to fall flat on his stomach when gravity returned. "Abandoned ship." He ran through the open door, not even bothering to close it behind him. Varian found himself in a cramped room, barely large enough for him alone. The floor was made of some shiny white metal and had a glass hatch right in the center. He threw the hatch open, a ladder, into an escape pod. He had to go. Moving off instinct and pure adrenaline, he hopped in and slid down the ladder, the hatch closing automatically behind him. He didn't even take a moment to process the escape pod's interior. He just found a seat and beeline towards it. Boom! Another explosion rocked the Aurora, forcing him to stumble forward. Luckily, forward was still in the direction of the seat, and he all but collapsed into it. The seat formed a black mass around him, plastic, and yielded easily to his body. There was a lap bar above it, currently out of place, and the right arm had a bright blue control screen on it. Once he was on, he pressed the white button. The lap bar swung down and over him, and at the same time, the escape pod spoke. "Launch in 3. Varian breathed out uneasily, his mind still rushing to process what had happened. He felt like he was forgetting something. 2. Sylvia. Sylvia! She wasn't in the pod with him. Nobody was. Where was she? Was she okay? Had she gotten to a... One. A sound like a potato fired from an air cannon stole the breath from his lungs as the entire pod jolted. Varian glanced up and saw the Aurora's hull receding into the distance, blue sparks spilling from its side where crimson flame burst from the seams. There was another colossal explosion that nearly burst his eardrums and rattled his bones. But then he had other things to worry about. Because apparently his pod chose that exact moment to hit atmosphere. Everything began to shake, his skeleton jostling about inside his body. He glanced around, inspecting the escape pod. It was a squat hemisphere with a ladder up in the center. There was a fabricator, communicator, diagnostic screen, fire extinguisher, and even a medical kit shelf, all on the walls. The diagnostic screen was lit up with red letters. Varian didn't have time to read all of it, but the last line caught his attention. Brace for impact. Oh, no. And then, the fire extinguisher next to him flew out of its casing and slammed into the ladder. It clattered to the floor, then flew to the opposite wall. Another slam and red lights began to flood the entire pod. The storage compartment opened up, and a panel came loose. It exposed a field of sparking, damaged wires. Varian stared transfixed, barely even breathing, as both panel and fire extinguisher clattered haphazardly around his trembling pod. The panel sunk to the ground. Then it lifted into the air and flew right at him. When the world returned, it was blurry and orange. Varian's head lolled about, sweat pouring from his light brown skin. Ugh, his head. Oh, that was going to swell up. And why was it so hot? Where even was he? And man, what was that bright light to his left? He held up a hand to try and block it, only for his hand to quickly start feeling uncomfortably warm. Something was loud, too, like a siren. Exactly like a siren. Because that light was fire! Varian's head jerked towards the fire, and once again conscious thought filled him. All of a sudden, he could barely breathe from the smoke, and the seat's lap bar was crushing his lungs. He had to get out. He brought his fingers to the control panel on his seat and pressed, but he couldn't hit any of the buttons, so all he got was a cannot process message. No. He was not going to die by being roasted alive just because he couldn't get out of his chair. He slammed his fist on the control panel, and that registered. The lap bar opened up, and he all but spilled onto the searing metal floor, grunting. He backed off from the fire, shielding his eyes from the glare, and then spotted the fire extinguisher just a stone's throw from him. He grabbed at it and... His shouts trailed into hacking coughs as his fingers touched the scorching metal. All the same, he lifted the fire extinguisher and pointed the nozzle at the grease fire, engulfing his life pod. White mist shot out, so forceful he fell back onto his backside, and the fire extinguisher tumbled from his hands. He crawled over to it, grasping it in his burned hands, and pointed it back at the fire. He held down the lever and braced himself for the kick. White foam blew out and sealed itself over the flame before boiling away just as fast, taking the fire with it. With the grace of a madman, he drowned the fire in retardant until there was nothing left but smoke wafting out through the air filters. Only then did he set his fire extinguisher down, brushing his blistered fingers on his shirt. His PDA. He had his PDA somewhere on him when the ship started to blow up, right? Those things were regulation. They had some sort of emergency feature, right? It turned out Varian did still have his PDA in his pants pocket. He pulled it out and brushed the soot off of it and pressed the power button. For a moment, nothing happened. Then 4 red letters lit up the glass. Booting in emergency mode. Meanwhile, the assistant began speaking to him through his brain implants. PDA initializing in emergency mode. Moderate head trauma detected, it said in a flat, feminine voice as his PDA continued to boot, circles spinning within each other. Your personal data assistant now has one directive and one directive only, to keep you alive on an alien world. To this end, it... Just as she said that, the PDA lit up with a series of blueprints for items. At the same time, something appeared in the corner of his vision, a large green circle with smaller orange, red, and blue circles beneath it. At least his brain implants could still stream data to his optic center. We'll reorganize your dive suit's inventory, display currently available construction blueprints, and hold other valuable information and programs. Please take a moment to familiarize yourself with its various functions. Good luck. All right. Varian did just that, taking a moment. The green circle lodged in his vision was oxygen and had a slowly rising and falling number of seconds within the circle. It seemed to stay mostly around 45. The orange circle had a small apple, the red one, which wasn't quite filled in all the way he had noticed, a heart. And the last one was a drop of water. He thought towards the red circle, and it expanded, pushing away the other circles to show him a gray, 2D human body with several red spots across its body. Light burns, blisters, head trauma. It didn't look good. Blinking away the in-depth health report, Varian tugged his PDA away and started climbing the ladder. They'd crashed on... what planet was this again? 4546b. What was so special about 4546b? He couldn't quite remember. His head was still filled with cotton. He pushed the hatch open and pulled himself on top of his hatch. The first thing that struck him was the heat, with a blistering humidity that seemed intent on cooking him alive. The sky was blue and the air smelled heavily of sea salt. He couldn't see the planet's sun from where he was facing, but he did see the aurora, off in the distance. Its massive outline dominated the horizon, tilted at an odd angle. The aurora suffered catastrophic hull failure. Cause unknown, his PDA beeped. Catastrophic hull failure was right. Massive holes were carved through its engine, spilling black smoke into the cloudless sky. The entire massive vessel had sunken halfway into the water. The water. Varian looked around, and he suddenly remembered what was so special about 4546b. Ocean planet. Almost no dry land at all, and absolutely no dry land in sight. Nothing but uniform, choppy water in all directions. 0 human life signs detected in 100-meter range, the assistants continued helpfully. His heart sank into his stomach, and his mouth hung open. No human life signs. Was his life pod the only one to eject? His lungs grew tight and the lumps settled into his throat. Sylvia! Was Sylvia all right? He couldn't see any life pods by scanning the horizon, but for all he knew, some of the pods had landed on the other side of the planet. Right? That could happen, right? Water for miles around. No humans in sight. His life pod rocked on the waves uneasily, smoke still spilling from the damaged wires and out the open hatch. The realization didn't hit Varian all at once. It didn't come in a slowly encroaching wave of terror. It ebbed and flowed like the tides, nausea rushing over him before receding to be replaced with numbing fear, one after another. I am so screwed, he whispered. That is the end of part 1 of chapter 1 of In Charge, a Subnautica fanfiction by Coincidencless. Thank you guys very much for watching. Part 2 will be uploaded shortly after part 1.